wide attention has been given in recent years to this problem, which is really now a national problem. Although the exact estimate of the number of narcotics addicts in the United States varies, it certainly is over 50,000 and is probably close to 100,000. The human suffering of these addicts and the waste of their productive talents are well known. The bills, and this is where they differ from legislation that's been offered in the past, would both humanize and modernize the federal approach to this increasingly grave problem. The law now simply does not make a distinction between the underworld wholesaler of narcotics and the victim of the system. The victim is more often than not jailed. What the addict needs is both physical and mental treatment, and that's what has been lacking so far.
As the chairman of the Committee on Narcotics Addiction of the National Association of Attorneys General, so that I, from the state point of view, and Senator Kennedy from the federal point of view, have seen at first hand what goes on in this narcotics addiction situation. Now, we are introducing 4 bills. I will describe 2 of them. Senator Kennedy is handling the others. There are quite a few co-sponsors of both of the whole package, and they're all contained in the release which you have, so that I will not repeat them. The senators are Case, Hart, Kuechel, Tidings, and Williams.
And Senator Irwin also.
And Senator Irwin, Senator Kennedy advises us should be added. Senator Saltonstall is co-sponsoring 2 of the bills, as you can see from your document, and there are quite a number of House members, including, from my point of view, I'm very proud to say, Congressman McCullough, who is on the Republican side, the senior member on the Judiciary Committee, and very important. The Seller?
Probably. Well, we just have to wait.
We just have to.
Yes.
We can't say. We are very hopeful to have at least the sympathetic consideration of Congressman Seller, who is our dean in the New York delegation and the chairman of the committee, and his support would be extremely valuable. Now, the 2 bills that I'm going to introduce, Senator Kennedy will make his own statement, are first to provide for pre-trial civil commitment of narcotics addicts as distinguished from pushers or dealers in narcotics. This is the traditional approach of the New York and California plans, which about 5 years ago inaugurated the idea of treating narcotics addiction as an illness or a disease rather than a crime with the greater opportunity for rehabilitation. So that's bill number 1. The other bill that I will introduce, which, as you will find from Senator Kennedy's description, matches one of his, relates to giving the states matching funds on a 2/3, 1/3 basis, 2/3 federal, 1/3 state, to establish facilities for the medical treatment which civil commitment, as I've described it, will imply, and that will include very heavily outpatient clinics. Now, just one more word and then I shall be through. The thing that's impressed me the most about the problem which we're trying to deal with in this way is, aside from the fact that it's an enormous New York problem, and there's no, we cannot be silly about not letting the facts be known. We have probably the largest concentration of addiction in the United States, perhaps in the world, unhappily and unfortunately for us, with estimates which vary anywhere from 25,000 to 3 or 4 times that in the way of people who were addicted. Now, the two things that have impressed me about this matter are, first, the incitement to crime. The judges of our criminal courts, many of whom are my friends, tell me that it is their firm conviction, quite apart from the figures, that somewhere between 30% and 50% of major crimes are being committed by narcotics addicts in the New York City area, and these facts come from the judges who preside over the criminal term in the borough of Manhattan, which is the key congested area. The second thing that has tremendously impressed me is what this does not only to the addicts but to families. I have had, and I'm sure Senator Kennedy has had, some of the most heartrending human disclosures that you could imagine. One of my people brought me this morning this headline from a New York paper: "Drugs kill exec's daughter who strayed to the village." And I have had, and I'm sure Senator Kennedy has had the same experience with families where the family would go off to Sunday dinner, let us say, come back and find their apartment denuded of every stick and stone because the boy or the girl had sold it all in their absence of a few hours to buy narcotics. This is how dreadful is this situation. Now, you had a White House conference. Many other things have been done. The President's Commission, supported by the Medical Society of New York, etc. And yet the federal government has not implemented a program of this character, with one exception, and that is that in the Community Facilities, in the Mental Health Centers Construction Act, for construction of facilities for mental health, we did succeed in conference in including a provision to allow these facilities to be used for treatment of narcotics addiction. But other than that, civil commitment and all of the other new techniques that have been developed in California, which was the leader in this, and in New York, the federal government has not responded until now, hopefully, with this teaming up by Senator Kennedy, myself, so many of our colleagues in the Senate and House. We think we have the best chance, which we've ever had, to get this job done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Javits. But the problem is not limited to drug addicts themselves, although they share the bulk of the headlines. The terrible burden of families is a problem. The innocent bystanders who've been killed or maimed by these addicts in their desperate search for money to finance their awful habit. Legislation being introduced today, we believe, will have substantial support in both the Senate and the House. Because of the wide support we believe that these legislative proposals have been given, we think that the legislation has the best chance of passage of any narcotics legislation in recent years. Legislative approaches to this very grave problem. One, the bill would give a prosecutor a greater degree of discretion in enforcing the narcotics laws. For example, the bill eliminates mandatory minimum sentences for marijuana violators and Internal Revenue Code, yet it retains the stringent provisions now existing in the Narcotics Drug Import and Export Act that is aimed at the real culprit, the major peddlers of narcotics. Moreover, this bill provides that the sentencing judge or the Attorney General may send a narcotics addict after he is convicted of a federal crime into a program of treatment rather than to prison. Another bill provides $7.5 million a year for each of the 3 years to aid in the establishment, development, and maintenance of treatment for rehabilitation services. These services include a full range of medical and psychiatric services. Up to 20% of the funds in this bill can be given by way of direct grants to private non-profit organizations. The major aim of this bill would encourage the training of personnel in the most modern methods and techniques of the program and the problem. The United States Public Health Services hospitals in Lexington, Kentucky, and Fort Worth, Texas, would be authorized to broaden the scope of their activities. For example, these hospitals would conduct research into the treatment of the problem of these dangerous drugs. The problems underlying addiction are, of course, much broader, the same as underlying all crime and delinquency. These bills won't eliminate addiction. Nothing will until we eliminate poverty and discrimination, but these bills will help by making treatment available to addicts on a broad basis. In summary, what these bills do, they're aimed at, is to help the addict, to not treat it just as a crime for those who are the pushers. The penalty will remain the same. For those who are merely the addicts and the victims of this habit, there will be some help, and there'll be help that will go beyond just being sent to a hospital. There'll be psychiatric help, be help to obtain jobs, there'll be help to obtain treatment after it would appear that the addict has dealt successfully with his problem. I might point out that if we just look at what has happened at Lexington, Kentucky, where we've just had a hospital, more than 90% of those who go to Lexington, Kentucky for treatment return to the habit. What we feel is necessary, those who are sponsoring this bill, is treatment and help and assistance far beyond that which has been forthcoming in years past. So we're hopeful that this legislation will receive the attention of the members of the Senate and the House of Representatives, will be supported by them, and will be passed so that we can take the necessary steps to deal with this very, very difficult problem existing in the United States.
Thank you, gentlemen. Senator Kennedy or I will answer any questions if you just address them to which of us you want to answer them.
Senator, is there any indication so far that with prolonged treatment you can have a better success in the 90%?
Yes. Yes. Yes, you can. And what we haven't done at the federal level is anything other than just putting an individual in a hospital, and frequently for a relatively short period of time. But we have found, for instance, in California, where there has been an intensive effort to treat the addict, give him aftercare treatment, it's been successful. And that means not just sending him to a hospital to cure him for a particular period of time, but also giving him psychiatric help. Why does a person turn to narcotics in the first place? Because he has a psychiatric problem. And you have to deal with that basic problem if we're going to cure him from narcotics. And that has never been done by the federal government before, and what we hope to have established with this federal legislation is that the federal government will begin to move in this field, and also through this legislation we will stimulate the states and the localities to start to move in this direction also. That's why I also point out that 20% of the funds that are available can also go to private organizations, because private organizations can be very, very helpful. And with this stimulation from the federal government, we perhaps can find some solutions to this problem that we haven't discovered in the past. I might point out that in the state of New York, for instance, which has the biggest problem, there are only two doctors that are now involved in research in the state of New York.
May I say on the research, Bob, and to the press, that there was some question for some time whether the Public Health Service research funds for mental health would be available for dealing with this problem. Now that question has been settled, and Senator Kennedy and I have ascertained from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare that these funds are available under Section 303 of the Public Health Service Act through the National Institute of Mental Health. And I'm very hopeful, and Senator Kennedy has just expressed himself, that more institutions may take advantage of these opportunities, because one of the things that's bedeviled this problem since I've been in it for the last 10 years has been the lack of real information on the causes and the cures. I will say this, and perhaps it's more appropriate for me even for Senator Kennedy, there is some promise in the so-called methadone treatment, which has been developed in the city of New York, and which has also been taken up importantly by the state. And also, gentlemen, I'm sure that somebody's going to ask us about the British system, the so-called British system of administering narcotics. And may I state for myself that I do not believe that we can offer, at least I do not believe that I could, and Senator Kennedy will speak for himself, offer that as a solution in the United States. The conditions are not necessarily opposite here to a tight island with a homogeneous population and a much smaller problem. But I do hope very much that the experiment now being carried on by the New York State Department of Health in this very field of administered narcotics may be the pilot plant which will demonstrate whether it can or cannot be effectively applied here. And I certainly favor very strongly that experiment and relieving the doctor of the fear that he's going to be punished for malpractice if he participates in that experiment, the fear which has been held over his head for many years by the federal officials. And I hope that Senator Kennedy and I can do a good deal to make doctors feel that they are free to participate in legitimate and authorized experiments in order to determine whether this system might work even here.
Has the Federal Narcotics Bureau seen these bills and has any reaction to it, talked to them?
They have. They've worked with us on the bills, and they generally support the legislation. We've also worked with HEW and with other government agencies and departments. I might say that this really goes back to the conference that was called by President Kennedy in 1962, where we brought in for the first time people from all over the United States, and then President Kennedy established a commission headed by Judge Prettyman, and they made certain findings and recommendations, and a good part of this legislation is based on that original conference and the recommendations that were made by Judge Prettyman's committee. And it has generally the support of HEW and the Bureau of Narcotics and the Department of Justice. Now there are variances involved here, as for instance the periods of times and sentencing and some of these other matters where there perhaps would be some disagreement, but I would hope that that would be ironed out before various committees. I might say in those two doctors that I mentioned earlier, these are two people who have switched from another profession to the study of narcotics. That's all there have been that have switched from another area to narcotics because of stimulation that's come from any either private or state or federal sources.
The important thing, gentlemen, without bedeviling you with so many of the details, because there is something going on, not as much as any of us would hope. The important thing is that we feel very strongly that the federal government is way behind California and New York. It's way behind the recommendations of the White House Conference and other authorities that have worked on this. And if we can do something to bring it up to date, at least, that will be a very measurable progress. And from that point on, at the very least, you will have the federal government in the forefront of the efforts which are being made in this field, and they will enormously increase. And the danger is so great, both of us feel and know it and feel it in terms of the crime rate and the other problems which we've described, that with all respect to all the important things both of us are doing in various fields, we feel this is a matter of very high priority and very high urgency. And the fact that both of us served as attorneys general is a rather interesting confluence of our basic interest in this problem and our knowledge of it.
Senator Javits, in a proposal of this kind, which affects so many government agencies, it is general that the administration makes a proposal, offers it, and subscribed to by senators here. Now the process is being reversed. The New York senators are taking the initiative. How did the situation develop that you, instead of the administration, had to take the first step?
Well, I think that Senator Kennedy's view on that would, of course, be very important, as he was an administration official. But my own view of that is, one, there has not been the needed action from the administration. For whatever reason, they could be obsessed with many other problems. And it's a little surprising because there have been such openings as the White House and these other conferences, but nonetheless, with respect to the introduction of a series of bills, and I would like first, before I say anything else, to express my gratification that the two senators from New York are able to work together on a difficult problem of this character so cooperatively. And it so happens that our experiences have an interesting correlation one with the other. Senator Kennedy, as you all know, was Attorney General of the United States, and in that position, of course, had enormous experience in this field. Indeed, I'm very honored that the department under him approved one of these bills back in 1962, or a bill somewhat like the ones we're putting in today. And I was Attorney General of the state of New York, and I served in 1955 and 6